Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Doomer Optimism. I'm your host today, Trace Crow, and I'm going to be speaking with Uncivilized Tom, a musician and environmental writer, about his experiences. So, Tom, why don't you tell me, just kind of give me your background. Tell me, like, what kind of brought you to this moment? Had you heard of Doomer Optimism before? What kind of attracted you to it?
Yeah, okay. No worries. Hey, Trace. Doomer Optimism. Yeah, so I have a background in music and jazz specifically, but then also in the larger environmental field. So I lived in New York City. I'm from the States. I'm from kind of all over. Dallas, Texas was where I was born. And then my family moved around a fair amount, moved up to the Northeast. And my dad is from Jersey and my mom is from upstate New York. So kind of made sense that I ended up in New York City, and that's where I went to university, and I got this double degree in music and environmental science. And I started working in environmentalism, primarily in the kind of waste and recycling realm. That was my focus. So I worked for the city for a little bit in their recycling office. And then I started working for this company that did like consulting for office buildings, primarily in the city, trying to reduce their footprint and trying to get them to recycle more. And eventually we started doing these things called waste audits, and I ran that program for them where um, we would go and sort their trash and pick out how much recyclables and how much compostables were in their waste stream.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would write a report on it. And uh, so it was but it was interesting when I did that, it was often late at night. So, like when the trash was coming down from the building when they closed up. So I hired a lot of my musician friends to come and sort the trash at these buildings because they could work at night and they were looking for kind of like casual work,
Mm-hmm.
um, part-time stuff. So, but I got pretty burnt out on that. And then while I was doing it, I was writing music and running some jazz projects and a record label. And um, the more I did that kind of stuff, the more I wanted to do music and the more I wrote music. And I've always been a guitarist, going back to, I guess, age 12 or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
teenage years.
Yeah.
And so the guitar has kind of been like constant in my life. And that's how I write my music. And I've been working on this book currently about a guitar concept. Um, yeah, so that's a bit of a background. Does that
Yeah,
get us
no,
to
that's
here?
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, so one thing we like to ask is, would you consider yourself a doomer optimist? If not, why not? If yes, why? Like, what attracted you to it? Because it's really only been like, I mean, I think it's been less than 2 years since Ashley really kind of put it out there, and it seems like it's like people are just starting to use the term as though it's existed for a long time. Um,
Hmm.
what were your kind of first thoughts about it?
Well, I was kind of getting to in that story that I was getting a bit burnt out
Mm-hmm.
from that, and that it was kind of like a greenwashing job, to be honest. And I was really into trash, and I still am into garbage, and that whole world's really interesting. And but these office buildings were not really recycling. It was kind of all going into one truck, and then it was not really clear where they were taking it, and then they're often hiring our company to just kind of like make them look good and like have some report that they could send and put on their website. So I started to get kind of dark about that. I mean, it's a very corporate world that I was in. Like I worked for Time Warner Center,
Mm-hmm.
some of these big, and I was in some. I got to see some crazy buildings and see kind of like the innards of the buildings, and got to go on some of the roofs and stuff like that. And some of what we did was building systems too, like trying to reduce energy usage or like meet these LEED certifications and stuff like that. But in the end, I felt like it was all kind of BS, and I got kind of burnt out on it, especially sorting the trash. You just like saw how much people, I mean, I like to be honest, it's like, some buildings, it's like 500 bags of trash a night
Yeah.
of just like, I mean, or more. And a lot of it is like putrescible waste all mixed in with plastics. And it's pretty confronting.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, that's life, but New York City is full on, as I'd probably say. And but as far as like, oh, so I started, reading. I was reading some different things, and not sure how I found it, but there was an article about Paul Kingsnorth that really turned the corner for me, um, and got me probably more on the Doomer realm, which was just that like it's too late. Like everybody's lying. Like we're not gonna like 360. Is it the project that
Oh
Bill
yeah.
McKibben did?
Yeah.
30. What is it?
Yeah. Like,
Uh,
was it 360.org?
yeah, 360 parts per million. Like we'll
Yeah.
never get there. Like you have to tear the system down if you want to make any sort of. And he's like he calls himself a recovering environmentalist.
Hmm.
Now he's gone into like Romanian Orthodoxy Christianity,
Mm.
which is interesting that he's gone in that realm. But he has some really amazing essays that got me. Like there's one in particular called Dark Ecology,
Hmm.
that kind of starts off outlining a character who's decided to move, off grid, off the land, and to set up a little cabin and grow his own food and stuff. And he's very anti-technology, like that sort of thing. Sort of sounds like Thoreau or something.
Hmm.
And then you find out that and like the society is starting to encroach on his little spot, and he's getting angry. And you understand, and then it's very powerful. Kingsnorth kind of uh, lets you know that this is actually Ted Kaczynski, who
Mm.
he's talking about, who is the Unabomber.
Hmm.
So, and you sort of connect with him at the beginning. You're like, oh wow, this is kind of like where I'm at. And
Yeah.
then you're like, whoa, that's not good. Um, so, and then yeah, then I read the Uncivilization Manifesto, which is Kingsnorth wrote with Dugald Hine, and that was out of the Dark Mountain Project,
Hmm.
and which is Doomerish, and that's where the name Uncivilized came from, was from Kingsnorth and that manifesto, and this idea that you can't really, the only thing that would really stop what's happening would be to kind of not retreat, but for things to just be less civilized. So if things were more uncivilized, maybe that would help. Or like, uncivilization would be closer to the land, right? Or maybe closer to the garden or something, closer to the source or whatever you want to call that. So that really resonated, and then that started to have some correlations with the music I was writing, and with the music I was getting into listening to, and some of the free jazz in New York and free folk, that sort of realm, folk jazz, Ornette Coleman, stuff like that. Sam Amidon, some of these realms where sort of like amateurism and complexity mixed together,
Yeah.
and which like jazz is a really good kind of field there, because it's very raw, and it's kind of soulful,
Hmm.
and so it's less about civilization. It's about kind of like listening and improvising,
Yeah.
which is not a very, that's kind of like a primordial thing, right? Like improvising with drums, or singing with people, or playing guitar around the campfire, like
Hmm.
those are all kind of humanistic things that aren't as tied to modern civilization, maybe. So the music, I guess, maybe became the optimism. Um, I mean, I'm still kind of on the edge. I'm not. I don't really know where we're headed. Um, yeah. Then I had a pretty big health scare, and that also made me thankful, I guess, that I was alive. And yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been watching How to Change Your Mind, which is Michael Pollan's. It's like a documentary about his book, which is about taking psychedelics. So there's 4 episodes, and it's like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, and MDMA. And he just kind of talks about it mostly from a therapeutic standpoint. Almost the whole thing is from a therapeutic standpoint. Um, but it was interesting that like either there's kind of like this, obviously it's a little bit like kind of new agey, right, like kind of the vibe of it, but this kind of sense that like you can get closer to this kind of elemental feeling. um and it is kind of like at the heart of it is uncivilized, right? Like one of the things these people kept describing in their psychedelic experiences was that like all of the rules of civilization just broke down or were meaningless. And that came with fear, but it also came with this ability to plumb the depths internally, when you don't have that pressure on you from all these other structures that you were really more or less born into. You didn't really have a choice to be born into these structures. But we're having this interesting moment, right, where the structures are sort of breaking down on their own, under their own stress. And so we do have this moment to kind of compost the past, to maybe create a new future. But yeah, I think as far as being a doomer optimist, for me, it can be very like, just depends on the day. It depends on what Twitter's like that day and what kind of news has been coming out. I tend to find that similar to your music, that the centering yourself or having something that you're kind of like that's present, that's real and right now, makes all the difference in the world as far as optimism goes. I wanted to kind of, so you had sent us, I think like it was what is it? Radio Eco Shock, like from 2009.
Okay.
I think maybe you didn't send it to us. It might have been on your website. Somehow I got on this, and related to you using uncivilized, right? And there's a quote in here from Paul Kingsnorth that I really kind of felt like reading, because it like, I was blown away that this is like 2009. Someone was coming in with this level of like kind of like nihilistic realism, right? But he said, if we look at climate change as a problem that we can solve within a certain amount of time, if we can just get the technology right, and if we can get the political will, and if we can build a big mass movement of people. I don't think that's really what it is. I think climate change is almost an existential problem for us. It's a predicament we have to live with rather than a problem we have to solve. And I think the root of that is the fact that we treat climate change as if it's something that's external. It's a sort of problem we've created that we can solve with human genius, but climate change is our society. Climate change is who we are. Climate change is our computers, our televisions, it's our flights, and we're all complicit in it, those of us living in the rich world. And he goes on more to describe, like, this was sort of the genesis of the Dark Mountain Project. But I was kind of curious about what your thoughts are on that kind of quote, and do you feel that way today? Like, does this kind of resonate with you, 13 years later? Or do you think that maybe you've kind of like, there's kind of hope in this music? There's hope in these kind of more tribal connections at the local level?
I mean, there's always hope, I
Mhm.
think. I mean, otherwise, why get up in the morning?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So, but it's a dark world for sure. And, he hits on, the rich world. That's a really good point, because it's not like, there are all sorts of other places where you couldn't be sitting here having this conversation
Mm-hmm.
because of fear of being bombed, or because you don't have internet, or a lot of other things, or you don't have the time because you need to be farming or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very real now. And trying to think of the other, oh, that we're all sort of complicit in it. Yeah, I mean, I'm a vegan, and it's been interesting to try and like eat more locally. I've been trying to get in, or get in more involved with my local food system, but it's like veganism, you have to, rely on some industrial food systems. But it's like, well, which one? Oh, do I want to be killing animals? Or do I want to be, you know, eating meat? Do I want to be eating cheese? Do I want to be eating eggs? There's all these like balancing acts, and so, but when you go down to like your salt, your oils, your grains, your beans, everything, your milk, your coffee. That's a big one because right, your tea. It's almost I was really into urban agriculture for a while as like oh, we should put rooftop farms on buildings and stuff like that. But it became very clear quickly that you can't grow much at all on a roof farm. I
Hmm.
mean, like that's a generalization, as are most things we say, but um, it's very hard to grow your own food.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
a lot of people would disagree with me and say, "Oh, it's pretty easy," like Tucker Max or whatever. But he's doing cattle raising, so
Yeah.
he's killing his let's not get into him, but I
Yeah.
liked that Doomer Optimism episode, but yeah, yeah, we are all complicit in it. I agree, and
Yeah.
I think it's got to completely crumble before anything, or really get some radical change. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
especially, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, I mean, things can unravel very quickly.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but things can also spin up and spin together rather quickly as well. And I think certainly there's the industrial food system is really a big problem in and of itself, right? One of the bigger issues is less. I mean, obviously, if you have or anyone who is vegan, if they have an issue with eating an animal, I like. I mean, that makes complete sense to me. The When it comes to the carbon cost of those animals, the ecological cost of those animals, it's really about scale, and it's about the way that they're raised, right? And the way that the crops that feed them are raised, right? And all of these things like really cycle. And the fact that beef is raised in Argentina and then shipped to China to be processed and then shipped here, and like all of that goes into that carbon cost. And if we're eating less meat, and it was meat what was raised locally, a lot of animals, especially like pigs and chickens, can be fed off of waste, off of the scraps and things. So
Yeah.
inputs are, it's much more circular in that way. Um, we've had that discussion, I think, several times on this podcast around like, that is it industrial ag that's the problem more than specifically meat production. But yeah, I think I find Kingsnorth's writing to be a little bit too doomery, but I can understand the impulse, right? Because like the book that really cracked my head open was Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler, right? And by the time 2009 rolled around, right, if you were aware of these problems, like Copenhagen, for instance, was incredibly bleak moment. And I
Hmm.
think like in context, that quote from Kingsnorth is happening. Like he said that during Copenhagen. So in all
Was that
fairness,
2000? Was that 2009 or something?
yeah,
I can't.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But in all fairness, if you've been paying attention to this for years, and then suddenly Copenhagen comes with Obama, the great environmental president, and it's like we're clearly not going to do crap about this. It was a very bleak moment. Um, but I think that in some respects, I think when Doomer optimists on the whole seem to kind of gravitate around this idea that collapse itself gives us room to maneuver in a way that like a full thriving society doesn't have as much room to maneuver. And I think like this, I do have a question here. I'm thinking about. I've been listening to a lot of your music, which I think is beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I thought I understood it. I listened to a couple pieces, and I was like, "Oh, I kind of get where he's going." And then I listened to a couple more. I'm like, "No, I don't have any idea." Like he's all over the map in a very good way. And I was kind of curious, like, what is the music that you play? How tied is it to this message? You know, is it a big part of it? I mean, because there's not words in your music, right? It's mostly instrumental.
Yeah.
Are you trying to capture that feeling? What kind of feeling are you trying to capture with it?
Well, okay. There's a couple things I have that reminded me of different things.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my music is it just happens. I don't have any control on it,
Hmm.
and that's part of the vibe. It just comes from the guitar,
Hmm.
and I try and trap the thing. I'll improvise
Hmm.
and try and remember and write down things that happen while I'm improvising, and then I turn those into comps. I'm actually a pretty slow composer, relatively speaking. But then I make like a kind of a guitar version of a song or a composition, and then I usually record that just like with a computer or something. Yeah, iPhone or whatever. I don't really have one anymore, but then I kind of think about how that would maybe sound with a band, what instruments I would want to hear, and then I would usually send my guitar thing to the band. Maybe I'd sing a little melody along with it, and then I try and put it into a format so that we could take that and explore that structure I created through improvisation and make it more exciting, add more rhythm, add more improvisational elements and try and build it up. And so, but all that stuff just kind of comes, it's not really about um, you know, doomer optimism or environmentalism,
Yeah.
but those are part of me, and certainly they have something to do with it. I'm not quite sure what, but something, and part of it is yeah, getting closer to some sort of like thing where where we're listening.
Hmm.
And you say the music kind of goes all over the place. That's yeah, that's also I love pretty much most music. So I think when those things when I improvise and write the music, the tunes, which are mainly they're kind of like song based. They're not, I'll make out like I'll make a sheet that has kind of like the chords and some melody and maybe some rhythmic stuff, and then the form,
Hmm.
maybe where we're going to improvise, and then everyone gets the same piece of music. It's sort of like a score lead sheet,
Hmm.
but it's a bit specific to that band and those people and that project, the way it's notated. But that um, is about trying to get closer to like a communal feeling through music,
Yeah.
and something that's not like, as for listeners, I don't want it to be super. I listen to a lot of music because I love it and I'm addicted to it, and for better or worse. But if I don't want my listeners or whoever's experiencing the music to be too alienated, or I don't. I also kind of like confusing people, and I think critics, they're confused and they don't really like it because it doesn't. You can't pin it down, and that's a beautiful thing about art and music is that, and humans, you can't pin the mind down. You can't pin. We're complex, and uh, yeah, I like to go all over the place. There's a Frank Zappa had some quote about, I think it's like anything, anytime, anywhere, anyhow. It's like the 5 A's or something like that.
Yeah.
And I loved that. And Zappa was a huge reason why I got into music at all. I had a mentor in public school who was a big Zappa head,
Yeah.
and he was my guitar teacher. And he this is in rural New Hampshire,
Okay.
and not rural. I mean, like kind of semi-rural, but um, he got taught me some Zappa, and I got Hot Rats, that album. Um, Yeah, oh, that anything, anytime, anywhere. I love the thing in Zappa's music where it could be like they'd be doing this like like 15/8, and then they go in like sleazy blues,
Hmm.
and I love that kind of like contrast and collaging.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean,
uh,
when I was listening to it, so obviously, like, every piece is every recording is different, right? I listened to the El Chico, several of the El Chico recordings,
okay, cool.
and then I just kind of went down the list, like on your website, and just sort of was like, okay, I'm gonna taste it out, take a little taste here, and then I went to Apple Music, and I think you have 2 records up there on Apple Music. Um, and I was amazed by the breadth of sound, right? That was a part of it all. Like some of it is like it almost reminded me like some of this more spare stuff that's like just like your guitar. It kind of reminded me of those nights when I'd be like kind of a little drunk and it's late night, and I pick up one of my the guitar player's guitar and it's in Dadgad, right? And it's just sort of like you just kind of play around and everything just sort of sounds so melodic and beautiful, and I don't know, it was just some of your music sounds like that, but then there's other times, especially when you bring in the band, where it's much more like flowing, like it reminds me of like the ocean in a way, that it's like there's a lot going on but there's a pulse to it, and the way that the instruments kind of come together and then they kind of slide out from each other again. It's really beautiful. I'm really glad that I've been gotten to get turned on to your music. Um, I want to kind of talk about you've got a well to let no let's talk about your musical background, because I'm kind of curious. You said you're addicted to music. I know exactly how you feel. I feel like I picked up guitar at 12 as well, and like I was obsessed. And if I had not been obsessed the way I was, I probably wouldn't have gotten through all the calluses and the pain and learning to play with your eyes, not looking at your fingers and all of the trouble. But I was obsessed, like 6, 7 hours a day, just instant. It was like instant addiction to it. Was it similar to you when you picked it up?
I think it was more I was addicted to music first. Like when I grew up as a really little kid, I was really into radio,
Yeah.
like pop radio and R&B in the 90s. And this is in Texas. And I was in, and then we were in the church and I sang in the church choir. So I think probably singing was my first musical um, experience. And then I played cello a little bit. The thing is, my sister was a violinist, and she was like always the music one in our family. She
Yeah.
was like a Suzuki kind of like not prodigy, but my parents pushed her really hard, and she'd been playing since she was 3. So
Hmm.
she was like really good and playing in these orchestras and going to France and stuff. So, but I got to hear that music too. They would often cart me around to the rehearsals. So I heard like some symphonic stuff. Um, so it was like radio, symphonic, then Beatles. My parents loved the Beatles, so I got really into that. This is like, 8, 9, 10. And but I always really liked pop, like Bop. That was like, like all sorts of terrible, I mean, like all sorts of stuff that was on the radio. But I liked rap and hip hop. That was really big in actually in Texas, in that area where I was, kind of near Dallas. Like, rap and hip hop was pretty, like, you'd hear it at school and everything. So, and that was on the radio. And I loved it all. And I was always singing things and kind of like, but yeah, I didn't really play music. I was like always in sports and drawing and stuff. Um, until, yeah, like 12, when everybody started getting guitars, and in middle school. And then I had that teacher, that Zappa guy, and he had this like really cool general music class, and he's a great guitarist. And he played some classical. He also like is a big fan of all music. But he did this demo one time where he was playing his guitar and he had like some effects, hooked up to it. And he was also like a metalhead, so he could like shred, and
Yeah.
really interesting
Kind of
dude. But
tracks
I
that.
remember, what'd you say?
But that kind of tracks actually. Like the Zappa to metal type pipeline, I think is probably pretty real.
Yeah, for sure. So, but he was doing a demo, and he could play all these songs that I was hearing on the radio, and then like he could play like Britney Spears "Hit Me Baby One More Time," which has like these really cool chords in it. That's a whole other story about like Max Martin in Sweden and like the people who actually wrote that music. Most of the music that I heard as a kid was written by like geniuses,
Hmm.
songwriting geniuses behind the scenes, and that get the earworms in your ear,
Yeah.
um, which is incredibly interesting. And well, I guess except the Beatles wrote their stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I heard that "Hit Me Baby One More Time," him playing the progression, and then he could play like pop punk stuff and
Hmm.
like Weezer and like he could play everything. And then I learned how to play Wild Thing on the guitar, which is just three chords.
Hmm.
And yeah, so but I was never like the best at guitar or anything. Like there were so many people who were playing it, but I like my friends started having bands, and I wanted to like figure it out. And I liked like punk and rock, and then my dad was like a big blues guy.
Hmm.
So he was always playing, Hendrix and BB King and like Albert King and Bonnie Raitt and what else? Yeah, Clapton, Blind Faith and Zeppelin. So he was into that, and so that was kind of in my ear too. And then I got into that, and I was like, Dad, like I like what you like. Um, so and then eventually I had a really good friend in high school. It's a public school. And he was a drummer, and he was a jazz drummer,
Hmm.
and his uncle was like a jazz drummer, and his dad was a big jazz fan, and he got me into jazz, and we had a band, and we would play, and then he would play me music, and I would hear like weird notes and stuff, and I'd be like, what the hell is that? Like,
Hmm.
gotta figure out what's going on there. And that's eventually actually how I got to New York. I followed my friend who was the drummer in my band. He moved to New York. He's still there to drum, and beautiful guy. And he used to practice like 10 hours a day in high school. He was like on the path of like, to get to New York, I have to be like the best.
Yeah.
And which has all sorts of crazy yeah, there is no best. And yeah, so that's kind of my musical background, I guess I'd
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was it about jazz? Like, I mean, if you clearly landed on that as your primary, kind of mode of operation, although that's not entirely fair because your music touches on a lot of different styles. But it seems like that's the primary mode. How was it just like, was that kind of instant for you, or is it just that it was the level of complexity and that it's always different? Like, what is it that really attracted you to jazz in particular?
Mm, I mean, it's a long journey. Jazz is like a life, long journey, and I wish I was better at it. And it's I love it so much. It's such a beautiful thing. And but up in Vermont, New Hampshire, where my high school was, we were right on the border with Vermont.
Hmm.
There was a lot of punk around and rockabilly. That was kind of like the local music scene.
Yeah.
And then and like people coming in touring from out of town, like coming to the college areas. But then there was a whole like jam band thing,
Mm. Yeah.
which was huge up there, like Fish and all those bands. There's more that I don't like, but my brother-in-law is like an OG Fish. Like he'd been to all of the original um festivals and everything as like a fan. It's interesting. And so I got into that a little bit. And then there was a particular group in there called Soul Live. Maybe you've heard of them.
I think I have. Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of like an organ trio. And they're kind of coming out of that jam band thing, but like it's more of like a soul African rhythms. There's a brother, two brothers, like the organist and the drummer are like really hooked in. And then there's a guitar player. So but they were playing like more complex harmonies, but more with the like, with like the groove going still, which I always liked. And yeah, they had a really amazing groove, and that had kind of like a hip hop element too. They were blending hip hop and jazz and soul, a little bit of rock, but then they had some stuff where the guitarist John Scofield was playing with them,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a real game changer for me because he was just playing these notes and these rhythms and his feel that on top of that was so incredible, and I'd never heard anything like that. And then, oh yeah, there's another big band called Medeski, Martin and Wood. Maybe you've heard of them. They're a jam band. Yeah,
I've
they
heard.
were pretty. They were pretty big up in that area. Kind of stoner vibes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that vibe up there. And John Scofield, did an album with them where they were his backing band. It's called A Go Go. It's a really good album, and that was actually that album. I heard a song on it, and yeah, I was getting into like fusion.
Mm-hmm.
That's a genre. Like Al Di Meola, and because my good drummer friend was really into it.
Yeah.
Trying to think it, which is more of like a rock jazz thing, which is cool. I like it. I like it. It's a little bit cheesy, not that much soul to it, but someone I was like, "Hey, could you play me some really good fusion?" Because I didn't really get it. I didn't really understand what it was. And he was like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll play you some Scofield, John Scofield." And he played me that A Go Go. And there's a song called Chank.
Okay.
It's an incredible song, and that really got the wheels turning for me. And I was really into Stevie Ray Vaughan. My dad really liked him. He's a Texas blues guitarist.
Yeah.
And I was always that's kind of like what I was trying to learn on guitar. And like I remember my friend being like, "Man, you got to check out Scofield." And I was like, "Nah, like I'm not. That's lame. It's like noodly." But then I finally heard it in a new light, and it flipped me around. And then it's interesting. I think it was around the time that YouTube was like just starting.
Mm-hmm.
This is maybe like 2005. Wow, it's crazy to think back. But there was some video I saw of Schofield. I was like, where are these notes coming from? Where does he come up with this stuff?
Yeah.
And of course, he played with Miles Davis. He was like one of Miles Davis's only guitarists. There's only a handful of maybe 5 guitarists that Miles played with, and Schofield was one of them. Man, there was an interview on, I think it was YouTube. It may have just been like Google or something, or Alta Vista. Like Google wasn't even, big back then.
All the same thing now. So
yeah,
yeah,
Google owns it all now.
Yeah, they're right.
Yeah, but there was a video where he was explaining some of his methods, and he's apparently like kind of into mathematics, and he taught at Berkeley for many years. And I think I could be wrong about that, but he was talking. He's like, "Oh, everything I know, I learned from Charlie Parker." And I was like, "Oh, who's Charlie Parker?" And then I started to realize that all these guys that I liked their guitar playing, George Benson, Wes Montgomery. Oh, I had a big moment with Wes Montgomery too.
Yeah.
But so there was a number. Grant Green was a big one too, and they were all, you start, oh yeah, it was a Google era, so I could read about them a little bit.
Yeah.
I used to read All Music. That site still exists.
I was obsessed with All Music.
Yeah. And I would read about them, and they would always talk about, like, Grant Green. He was trying to play like a horn player. And I was trying to, like, figure out what they were playing, and like, I guess they'd call that transcription, where I was, like, copying licks and trying to be able to play the stuff all, by ear. That they didn't have any of that books or anything back then.
Yeah.
And or tab. I didn't never really like tabs, but sorry, I'm kind of going on, but I'm getting somewhere.
Yeah.
With the oh yeah, okay, they all like Charlie Parker. Yeah. And of course, my friend who was the drummer, he was always trying to get me into the classics, because he was like, if you want to learn jazz, you got to know like Monk, Thelonious Monk, and Charlie Parker, and Bud Powell, and John Coltrane, and Miles Davis, and these folks that I didn't really know anything about. But because all of my guitar, of course, then, I was getting into Wes Montgomery and Grant Green, and they all played tunes by these people on their records. And
Mhm.
this is in the CD era. So, I was buying the CDs and being like, oh, what tune is, and it became this like cool game, kind of like collectibles. And I still like that about jazz, the fact that like people play the same songs and you get to hear how their version of like, Take Five or All the Things You Are, or Take the A Train, these like they call them standards, but some of them are written by Duke Ellington or Monk, like Straight No Chaser. That's another one. All sorts of tunes that they all cover, and you get to hear the different personalities. And then you go back to the source and you hear how Charlie Parker played these things back in 1930, 1940, 1950, and then it all explodes in the 70s, and then free jazz, collapses the whole thing
Mhm.
in a great way. So yeah, jazz. That's how I got into jazz, was I guess jam bands and blues. Blues
Yeah,
guitar, the Hendrix chord.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's a sort of interesting pedigree, but not really that surprising, really. I mean, it almost seems like jam bands are jazz bands, right? But like it's just the way they're a certain way they're presented, and it's mostly around the culture stuff that grew up around them, right? Along with festival culture and things like that. But at the heart of it, I mean, they're doing much the same thing, right? They're improvisational performers, Um, yeah, it's funny. I've never been that interested in jam bands. My wife loves them, and she had this book called Jamaica, and it was like a oral history of like jam bands, basically. And I like read the whole thing. I was super fascinated, and I didn't know like 99% of the music they were mentioning. Right, I had no idea, but it was still really fascinating to read about the kind of confluence of festival culture with this type of jazz, that like kind of created this whole other thing that became a whole subgenre. So you are working, you have completed a book, right? Like the book is
yeah,
completed.
yeah.
Um, tell me about it. It's a really fascinating concept for a book. So tell me about the book.
Okay. It's related to all this stuff we're talking about, but it's really about, everybody plays. A lot of people play guitar.
Hmm.
You play guitar, right? Some.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are these chords that they teach you at the beginning when you're first learning, like G, D, A, E, C. Those are the main ones.
Hmm.
So my book is all about those chords. They're sort of campfire chords or cowboy chords,
Hmm.
and it's all about those because I'm kind of obsessed with them,
Hmm.
and I've been studying them and talking to people about them. And those chords all involve open strings on the guitar that are ringing as you're playing. So, but that's a standard tuned guitar. This is not about alternate tunings, which I love, but the project is constrained to standard tuned EADGBE, which is the Spanish tuning.
Hmm.
And it's about open string chords on the standard tuned guitar. And yeah, so it's about that, and it's also a little bit about the duality of the guitar as a kind of folk object that everybody has, in the corner of a room, or that disabled people can play, or that people that beggars, or it's a. And then at the same time you have like Slash and Guns N' Roses and like stadium rock
Yeah.
and shredders, and like you have Guitar Center where you have all the guitars up on the wall and they're all sparkly, and there's like a consumer element to it. So it's about that. The book is also trying to capture some of that duality that also exists in those chords, because those chords are pretty easy and you don't really need to know any theory to understand them, but you can also write songs with them very well
Hmm.
because you can move them around and discover things without having to know anything about music, um, as opposed to like a piano where you have to at least know a little bit about like keys and stuff like that. Or so yeah, it's all about that. But it's involves some interviews I've done with people and some correspondence, and so it's not all my writing. And then it includes a bunch of chords that I use and that I've discovered, that I think are cool and that I often use to compose. Some of them are in my music, and often a cool thing about these chords, I mean, there's lots of interesting things about them, but is that melodies can come out of them. The way the open strings kind of like disrupt linearity of music is really beautiful, and I utilize it as a means to make melodies and guitar parts. And a good example would be, which I often give, is this. I spoke about Weezer. There's a song called "The Sweater Song,"
Mm-hmm.
and I teach a lot of guitar lessons. I've taught lots of beginners, and so you use these chords to teach people. Teaching is a great source of hope and optimism.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about I have two children, I have toddlers, and yeah, that's a great uh humbling experience, and among many other things. And but this tune called "The Sweater Song," it has this guitar riff in it that I learned pretty young on, that's really cool and pretty weird. It has some like dissonant notes in it, but all it is a shape moved up and down the neck,
Mm-hmm.
a chord shape. And then you get this cool riff from it. And then in the song, the lyrics and the melody come directly from that guitar part and that riff and the way that the open strings are interacting and creating its own little melody.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Another one would be "Come As You Are" by Nirvana. It's got open strings, right, which are technically playing a chord, and that's like the basis of the whole song. There's so many. "Knocking on Heaven's Door,"
Yep.
that's like it's a couple GADE thing. "Wild Thing."
Yeah.
Uh, there's almost too many to even like go into it. I mean, and then the guitar has its own cultural thing. In the 60s, it became just such a like um, instrument that was so ubiquitous and such a core element of like all the music from basically 1950 to like 2000. Now we're in a weird era where like the guitar is a little bit kind of retro and like referential, at least in pop music.
Yeah.
You hear it, you'll hear it in like what's that artist? Uh Not Dua Lipa, that's what my daughter likes. It's oh, I forget. Dr. Luke is the producer, and he played on SNL. He's really fucked up, but um he's like he's a really sketch guy, but he played guitar in SNL. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I
That's
didn't.
like how he
That's
yeah, so
funny.
he's a
Yeah.
guitarist, and yeah, like Katy Perry. Oh yeah, Doja Cat. That's who I was thinking. That's like she won like a Grammy or something, but there's a little bit of guitar in that. You can like hear it kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, things have gotten weird, obviously, with the ability to synthesize so many sounds. Um, a lot of what the explosion of the guitar, right, in the 60s, a lot of that wasn't just the electrifying it, right, and the ability to like this whole other like realm of sounds, right, that was possible with this instrument. But I think that like, just the ability to manipulate every sound in every conceivable way now, sort of it takes some of the need of the guitar away, right? Which is what I find really fascinating about the way you play guitar, the way you approach the guitar, the way you're writing about the guitar. Like you're writing about it in a way like kind of like why we fell in love with it in the first place, why it, like, it's sort of like there's the piano and there's the guitar, right? These two kind of like ubiquitous instruments, and it's because they do these things that no other instrument really quite does, right? Or has this kind of uh I don't know, experimentation built into it, right? That you can try a lot of things. I always found, you kind of mentioned piano needing to know kind of the keys, and I always found that, like, the piano always seemed very logical to me, right? It was like, we're going to do this, we're going to make music. Where the guitar, even from the very beginning, felt very mystical to me. Like, it was like, a G chord looks nothing like an E chord, like completely different geometric shapes, right? And then, but it doesn't even make any sense. Like, if you don't know theory, it's just like, I just make this form and it makes this beautiful sound. There's no rhyme or reason to it, right? And then there's like a D, right, that looks nothing like the rest of them, and you kind of, I don't know, it just always felt so mystical to me, because I didn't know any theory at all till at least 10 years into playing guitar. And so I just listened to songs and learned how to play them. And probably one of the most interesting, like, moments for me was learning Wonderwall with that bottom the bottom E, or the high E, right? He has his pinky on it in every variation of the chord, so it kind of creates like this high pitched kind of drone note the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And I just became ubiquitous, and everything I ever wrote, I always like I love that kind of sense of this drone note, that there was just something kind of tying it all together. And that kind of stuff it's there and easily available with the guitar, right? Because you have this kind of weird setup with the Spanish tuning, with the standard tuning, like you mentioned. What are your hopes for the book? Like, what kind of audience are you looking for? What do you really, what are you hoping people get out of the book?
Well, I wanted to say also, I hope I have that in common with you. I didn't really grow up with a theoretical, probably for 10 years. Eventually there was a guy in Vermont that I took like jazz guitar lessons with,
Mm-hmm.
and who was amazing and really kicked my ass. And he was kind of this. So in Vermont, there's Brattleboro, Vermont, which is a
Mm-hmm.
really really rad town. And there was a guitarist named Attila Zoller, um, who he came from Hungary to New York, and then he moved up to Vermont, and he started the Vermont Jazz Center up there, which still exists, but he died maybe mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm Hungarian, and his story kind of, I'm a quarter Hungarian, but his story really resonated with me, and his playing, and he actually mentored a bunch of players in New York, like Pat Metheny and Bill Frisell and Peter Bernstein, some people that I really love, and I actually got to study with some of them, and in New York, and they all love Attila, and he was also really into electronics, and he created this like budget jazz guitar by Hofner. I think you can still buy it. But also a very amazing pickup that sounds amazing that I use on acoustic guitars. But it's called a Zoller, and he this mentor I had up in Vermont. He had one of Attila's original guitars, and so Attila's method and all that was integral in what I learned and all that. But what I hope with the book is that it will help people. That's what I really want. Is that another thing you said about how, like, you play guitar. I think you play other instruments as well. Clearly,
It's
piano.
just guitar. I mean, I think every guitar player eventually picks up the piano a little bit, right? It's just sort of
Right.
the natural Bob Dylan like trajectory, like guitar, and then I'm going to start playing piano.
Yeah. And then I can't. Yeah. Then I don't play any guitar. Yeah. Once my hands go, I can just play piano.
Unless
Standing
you're
up like
Johnny
he
Greenwood,
plays.
and then you're one of the best guitar players of your generation, and then just never pick up the guitar again for some reason. But yeah, so
Synth on everybody.
yeah, so yeah, what were you saying? Sorry, continue.
Oh no, all good. I was saying that wanted to help people, and oh yeah, like it never ceases to amaze me how many people have across the world have spent some time like with a guitar in the basement, like trying to like make up their own little riff or something, or like you say, trying to figure out Wonderwall or like some tune that they love. And so I love that about the guitar. That's beautiful. And I think that speaks to some things that we might need that are like not on the screen, that are not on the device. It's like trying to get lost in music more and trying to explore that more and understand it more. And I'm hoping these chords have changed my life, these campfire cowboy things. And I hope people can learn from what I've learned and just trying to share, yeah, share some stuff
What do
with
you
people.
what do you attribute that to? You know, like what is it about the guitar? Do you kind of feel like you have an answer to that? Like, I mean, there's so many instruments and they're all beautiful in their own right. So like, what is it about the guitar? Because it wasn't just the electric guitar. It was already like it's been a staple. Some version of the guitar has been a staple for hundreds of years, you know, if not thousands of years. Like, what is it about that instrument?
Yeah, well, I think a short answer would be, and this is actually probably from talking to other people who don't play guitar, is that it's very easy to self-teach.
Yeah.
So there's no barrier to entry.
Hmm.
And so it's like the everyone instrument.
Yeah.
And it's like it accompanies the human voice. So, you go back to the Delta blues people, where you'd be singing the blues about your life and you would have an instrument that you could play that you didn't need conservatory training to be able to play and to be able to accompany yourself with chords, the 1 4 5 chord,
Yeah.
or a drone. It's a great droning instrument too.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is.
um
That's fascinating. I can tell you for me, there was something about that it's like literally close to your heart, right? Like I felt like because when I would sing with it and play when I was young, like it felt like it was like adding heft to my voice. Like it was mixing in a way that was actually very physical, not just, not just oral, not just, like in the air. It was like they were mixing in a way. I don't. It was all almost like the molecules were mixing in my chest. It felt very powerful. Even when it was obviously I'm 14, it's terrible, right? It sounded terrible. It was a horrible caterwauling, right? But to me, it just felt like this, primal. Like I can augment my voice. I just read Dune. It's like The Voice, where it's like this extra thing that adds to, like it's kind of like what you're saying, like the voice and the guitar together are fine. Like that is enough. You know what I mean? You can make amazing, beautiful, complex, all-encompassing art with like very little ingredients and very little training, really. I mean, Wild Thing being a perfect example, right? It's like three chords played as stupidly as they possibly could be played, and yet it's amazing. It's an amazing song.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I would also add that the guitar is sort of a drum, a
Mhm.
drum. And I mean, you go back to the thousands of years, there's something called the gimbri. I think it's an African three-stringed instrument. And those ones sound even more drum-like, where they have this kind of like, and I mean, generally, you didn't play with a pick, you just play with your fingers,
Mhm.
and that's how I play with my thumb almost exclusively, and but I use my thumb and I kind of hang it out like this.
Mhm.
And that allows you to get closer to the rhythm and to drone or get into trance or something with the
Yeah.
guitar.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really
So I
interesting.
think I think it has that kind of like um well, primordial, primeval, but also um something about it being almost like healing, like it can be, like drum healing and stuff like that, rhythmic cleanse, those kind of tropes and stuff like that. I think they relate to the guitar and its ability to connect with people.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And with the book, do you kind of interpret it, or are you hoping that it's like you don't have to be a musician to appreciate it? Or is it a little bit kind of you definitely are going to get more out of it if you have experience with these chords, and with guitar in general.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there's also some quotes from non-guitarists that are pretty interesting,
Yeah.
like a piano player, I think a saxophonist, and so I would hope that musicians, people who like music, would be drawn to this book. Um, and but I mean, guitar, I mean, it goes beyond. I mean, like, yeah, this whole because the thing is, like, the act for me, it's difficult because like the act of just playing guitar is a little bit like almost selfish or something. Like I should be like, and this was always my problem in the environmental world was like, oh, I always wanted to just be like playing music with people or playing shows or
Hmm.
happenings or whatever, and yet all the environmental people are, oh, you should be like studying, getting your next getting your master's degree, getting your certification to be a zero waste consultant or whatever. And I just like, I don't know, either both worlds I couldn't really hang in. Like also the idea of like practicing, your instrument 12 hours a day so that you can shred never really gelled with me either.
Yeah.
So, and then it also like, I was a sport kid, I guess, growing up, and it was funny that I went to music school kind of hoping that it would be less sport oriented. And I think jazz has been,
Worse than sports.
and it's worse. Yeah, man, it became
Yeah.
worse. Yeah, it became like a jock endeavor
Yeah.
and very competitive. And a lot of that I would attribute to kind of like the jazz education sphere, which I mean, jazz is a dying art form though. So power to anybody who's trying to keep it going because it'll get lost. And it's a mystical thing. It's almost like a religion, I'd say. Jazz, the swing,
Yeah.
the New Orleans stomp and the Congo Square, all these kind of like historical things are deep and hard to teach and are very experiential. That's like the only way you can really, I mean, you can only learn jazz by playing it. And that's why I switched to environmental studies. It was like, I'm not going to like learn jazz by studying this.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm never going to be as good as these people that have all the gigs and that can actually make a career out of this. Funny thing that happened is that once I started thinking like that, I started writing a lot of music and then I was playing gigs and like probably helped to have like my mind,
Yeah.
tossed around a bit or whatever. But saying something about jazz education. Yeah, and then now there's like high school. So you can go to like you can learn jazz in your high school. But that's not how I learned. We had the worst jazz band in the world.
Yeah.
But like you go to Los Angeles where like that's the pipeline to New York City is like all the big you have the charter schools and like everybody is learning jazz in middle school and in high school and they're competing and they're going to the competitions and who's the best jazz band, who can shred, who can like play all the tunes. And then they all get the scholarships to go to the schools in New York and Boston.
Hmm.
It's a really interesting world, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's watering the music down, and it makes for a really weird educational experience if you're trying to like learn it
Yeah.
because it's very competitive and but that the thing is that is kind of a microcosm of the music world. Like it's not easy
Hmm.
and nor is there much money involved at all. And yeah, you have to know your stuff if you want to do that.
Yeah. But what's interesting is that, you kind of bring it back to like the idea of campfire chords, which by the way, I don't know if you coined that or not, but like I love that term because it's like it's immediately evocative, and if you've been around it at all, you know exactly the chords you're talking about, right? Like someone's inevitably going to whip out "The Weight" by the band or something,
Yeah, hell yeah.
and like everyone can sing along to a certain degree, although no one ever really knows all the lyrics, right? But like, yeah, I mean, it's these sort of things. Like, I think that this simplicity and the cultural familiarity with it makes these chords and these song structures so powerful. I mean, the blues is basically the same song thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of times over and over. It's really about, it proves the point that the song is not the chords, right? The song is the performance. It's the combination of performers. It's the way the voice sounds. It's the words that are being spoken or sung, and that in many respects, the chord structure is semi-irrelevant, right? It's just sort of, it's a vehicle for transmitting something, a higher type of language among humans.
I think I just want to, I want to just add one thing. It just reminded me of this amazing John Coltrane recording where, I mean, he played lots and lots of blueses. But there's this, everyone should read the Coltrane books. They're incredible. And he's so deep, and he started his own religion, incredibly deep cat. But he has a recording where he's playing blues, and it starts out, I think it's just trio. No, he has a famous quartet, John Coltrane Quartet, McCoy Tyner on piano, Elvin Jones on drums, Jimmy Garrison on double bass. And they start playing, and they're playing a blues, and it's pretty fast. It's like a medium tempo. But you can't even really hear the chords, but it's kind of like a drone blues. It's like all one chord basically. And then it just devolves eventually. I think this is on a live recording, and it's just a duet between Elvin and Coltrane. Elvin Jones is an incredible drummer, really loud and bombastic. And eventually, so they're just duetting over a blues form. And eventually it gets more heated, and you hear like the drums break. Like the hi-hat breaks, and he's just like playing on two drums, and they're still going, and it's like 16 minutes long. And it's very spiritual, and they're not playing chords, they're playing energy. And Coltrane was always like pushing. He was always striving and trying to, I mean, he's known for playing sheets of sound and developing these new chordal systems where he could play on top of like old tunes, and he could play multiple chords per measure. Something called giant steps is like his most famous one. And he was a genius, absolute genius, but also like a technical thing. But then he was always really into like the community of it, and like involving younger players, and like also just obliterating his music so that like it got more towards a what I call like a meta modern thing, where it's like the one thing that like it's almost like God, and he got into Christianity, but like the oneness, and you're all centering around that. And so he got into more experimental realms where it was more about like just making noise, or like making squeaks or growls, that were, and that's his really later stuff right before he died.
It's beautiful. I don't know if you end up watching the Get Back documentary about the Beatles recording Let It Be. But there's like all these funny interludes where like whenever they weren't playing music, Yoko and John would just sort of like, he'd go on the drums and she'd grab a mic, and then some other people would be there, and they just were like basically just screaming and just like freaking out on the instruments. And yet it's like strangely compelling, you're kind of like, wow, this is, I get it. Like, I get it. It's not something I'd like sit and listen to 25 minutes of this, but it's a vibe, and I think I just kind of want to, I don't know, I feel like kind of compelled to keep kind of coming back to this idea of the guitar and these chords as being something elemental. I guess like kind of looking at your bio and looking at your website and reading some of the Dark Mountain stuff again, and like, checking out the copy of the book you were able to send me. It was like, I was kind of seeing it. It was like, oh, it's kind of, there's something really important here, like the performance and the connection and stuff. Like, I think that is a huge part of jazz. Of course, recording technology allows you to record a performance and repeat it, but like in the heart of it, right? It's the performance. It's the one time you're going to see it this way in this room with these people. and you are all experiencing something that really will never happen again. Even if you listen to it on record, it's not the same thing. You know, you weren't in the room, you weren't there for this recording. I don't know. It seems really powerful, and like juxtaposing with what you were saying earlier about how the hyper competitiveness of the arts in general. I would say you could say all arts, not just jazz, not just music, but all arts are hyper competitive. It sort of leads to this like referencing more and more obscure like reference points. So it becomes nichier and nichier and nichier until there's like this smaller and smaller group of people even understand the references that you're making. And so, you know, that kind of really kind of oneness kind of performances in a room together really sort of like gets back to like why people played music in the first place. You know, it's just, it was a cool way of communicating with each other and spending time together.
Yeah. Totally. It reminds me of this idea that I think I may have mentioned, you know, we're kind of in the postmodern age, I think I'd probably say, which sounds ridiculous, mo. Yeah. But it's funny that a lot of artists kind of like, especially in jazz, at least modern jazz, because they don't really teach that at jazz schools. Like, what's the aesthetic of like where we're at today? Mm-hmm. We're way beyond postmodernism, like way in philosophy as well, you know. So what are we in? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the Doomer Optimism era. I don't know, but I like this thing of the metamodern. Yeah, metamodernism. I got into that recently. There's a visual artist named David Thorpe, mm-hmm. who has really cool. It's like anti-niche, where like the art should have some sort of greater meaning that everyone can connect with. Almost like maybe there's an amateur element, or there's a drone in music is supposed to be something everyone can connect to, or maybe the electronic beats or something like that's things that people can connect to. Maybe, I mean, it used to be the blues. I mean, rock and roll comes out of the blues. Jazz comes out of blues too. I mean, blues is from before all that, and blues is probably was a drone originally. Mm-hmm. Blues originally was probably people singing over drums in Congo Square in New Orleans. Yeah. You know, on their day off from being slaves. Yeah. So yeah, the metamodern era we're in, where it's also supposed to, I mean, theoretically supposed to connect with some sort of like greater narrative. Mm-hmm. that maybe maybe acknowledges climate change or acknowledges the digitalization of our times and the industrialization of our times. But we're now in like post-industrial, right? Post-industrial.
We're gonna be pretty soon enough,
these are all
regardless.
These are all words that don't mean anything. But yeah, I wanted to read something. I have an introduction thing, and the last bit of it says, "So societies crumble and ecosystems collapse as we spin from massive human and non-human exploit into further uncivility, with all its terrible beauty and inevitability. And what will remain of the decadent cultures from the 2010s, we might ask? There surely be some splendid guitar uncivilized erupting from the rubble as we celebrate the earth around a post-apocalyptic campfire, with those freaky, folky jazz chords to keep us warm or cool. It's hard to say for sure, but the more the merrier in this regard, and there's sure to be a guitar lying around. Maybe it's on fire." So that's from the prologue.
Yeah, love that.
I don't know if that'll be in the book because I want it to be a little bit bitsier, but yeah, I mean, guitar, yeah, there's something like you were saying at the campfire, like there's something humanistic about those cultural experiences or something.
You know, it's funny because I was like, you know, so my like summer of '69 kind of like band, you know, we were in college, we thought we were going to make it. We lived together for 2 years in a flop house together, you know, like we really took it very seriously.
Where at?
In Michigan. We were all college students at University of Michigan.
Oh, cool.
And it was a spectacular moment in my life that is like totally cliche, because virtually everyone was having that same kind of moment in during those years, right? During those years in their life, you know, early 20s. But I find we get together as a group like every year, and we go camping, and we always all bring our guitars. And what I find really fascinating is that even though we have this, you know, now 20-year history of being friends and playing music together, it always ends up with just like one guy with a guitar and all of us just singing together. You know, like even though we could make bigger music, right, we would be capable of doing that. This time we actually brought some drums because our drummer was there this time, and so we actually had some drums, but really it was just the kids were banging cymbals and tambourines and things, you know. It is like a future, no matter how bleak, that doesn't have music is not one I'd want to live in. You know, that is it is an easy thing it is an easy source of joy, right? It doesn't require a lot. It just requires some people, some voices, something you can call an instrument, drum or something, you know? Yeah.
It's also a really big, it's a gift, you know, that we can often take for granted. You know, it's a huge blessing, you know, especially as, you know, your ear, we can hear, you know, as just as seeing is a gift, you know. It's like music is a massive privilege.
Yeah.
I interrupted you.
No, that's no problem. I was going to ask you a total like, well, because we're kind of wrapping up at the end of the conversation here. I wanted to ask you just like a straight up, just like, you know, like 20 questions type of question. Like, we talked a lot about jazz, but what's your favorite pop or rock record?
Whoa, that's a hard
question. It could be
question.
an album, it could be a single. You could say a couple. I'm not going to pin you down to one if you have a couple. It's hard for you to pin down.
All Things Must Pass, George Harrison.
Yeah.
The LP.
Yeah.
A lot of Dylan.
Yeah.
Probably. Oh, Dylan with the band.
You like pre motorcycle accident Dylan or post?
I like it all, man. Dylan's deep. Pop though. I mean, oh yeah, probably some early jazz though that was pop at the time, like some big band stuff, like Mood Indigo. It's Duke Ellington. What other pop stuff, man? This guy Max Martin is incredible. His melodies he writes. There's some great Backstreet Boys melodies.
You can rip on those boy bands, but like you can't listen to those songs. Like when you remove, like they're 25-year-old songs now, right? So like when you remove yourself from the cultural context of being a 19-year-old guy and it's embarrassing to like this music, like these are damn good pop songs. Like many of them are really, really well written pop songs, you know?
I really love this single by Phoebe Bridgers. It's called Motion Sickness. She's a current artist. She's a great guitar player. That song is incredible. The melody on it is incredible, and she plays a lot of open tunings. But Joni Mitchell, what's that Parking Lot one?
Oh, Big Yellow Taxi.
Yeah, the lyrics. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
that one's killer. Yeah, and her guitar playing is insane.
Yeah.
Totally underrated.
Totally, you're right. Yeah, she's totally underrated guitar player.
So is Dylan, though. I've been trying to get Dylan to talk to me, and it won't happen for the book. And
he doesn't talk to anybody, though. In all fairness.
Yeah. That's so dumb. He should talk to people.
Except for Scorsese, he'll just talk to Scorsese. That's it.
Well, wish me luck. What do you think I should ask him if I can?
Oh God.
About the guitar.
Oh my God. I don't even know, man. I would just freeze up if I had the chance to talk to him in any capacity. I'd just freeze up. I've always loved about him, especially the live recordings before he got in the accident. Like that guitar playing is like it's so sloppy, right? And like out of like the time that changes, it's just it's like a voice and a guitar just like perfectly melded together and like in their own world of rhythm and sound. It's really
I gotta send you something right now. Have you heard the I got it here. I like Bert Bacharach, by the way.
yeah,
He
yeah,
wrote some great tunes.
yeah.
But yeah. Oh, jeez. Okay, Dylan with John Fahey too. We didn't talk about John Fahey.
Yeah.
Have you heard his Christmas album?
I
You
haven't.
must have. Oh man, amazing.
Oh, maybe I have,
Uh,
but I've never sat down and listened to it.
yeah. Okay, so it's Dylan on the Tonight Show in the '80s. I don't know if this is. I don't even know when the motorcycle accident happened.
It was 67, I think.
Okay, so
So
this
there's
is way
like,
after.
it was like acoustic folk Dylan, then electric Dylan, and then it was like I think Nashville Skyline might have been the last record he did before the motorcycle accident. And then it was like the Basement Tapes, right? That's like started like his new like 70s kind of renaissance, late 60s, 70s renaissance. Excuse me, that's when he started really playing with the band more,
Oh, Basement Tape. That was in the '70s. Basement
No,
Tapes.
that was 60s, 67, 68. Like that was the first record, I think, after that motorcycle accident that came out. But he definitely like the more reclusive Bob Dylan, the one who's just like, you know what, fuck the rat race, I'm not doing this anymore. That like the motorcycle accident definitely seemed to influence that, a lot less touring, and more just like kind of less frenetic record, coming out with records, right? I mean, he came out with like 7 in like 4 years, and then I think
What's your Twitter handle, bro? What's your
Dog Eat Crow.
Okay, I'm sending you some Backstreet Boys first.
Perfect.
But I couldn't second, but I gotta find this Dylan thing. It's so incredible. But it's with this punk band who's his backing band. He's got this like trio playing with him, this punk band, and from the '80s, and it's on, it's on television,
Yeah.
and they play a blues.
Oh, that's crazy. That's crazy.
And then they play some other songs, and just the guitars are just like raging, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good one. Then probably some like really ripping like hip hop, like Biggie Smalls or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
just to get some flow in there.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of wrap up, what what's next for you? Like do you play with a different band on like like different times, or is it more or less like the same group of people you play with?
It's like a collective, so it changes each time, and sometimes it's solo guitar. It just depends. I kind of like to just like do what feels right,
Yeah.
and um, so yeah, it's sort of yeah, it's a collective, but yeah, there is a core group of people that I like to work with, but I like to have doubled instruments. That's one thing that I really like, especially 2 double basses.
Mm,
It's one of my favorite sounds. So
yeah.
I have an album I'm working on. If there's anyone listening that's on a record label or whatever, like I have this album. It's really good, but I don't have any label people that are ever want to touch my shit with a 10-foot pole. So
There are label people still?
oh, good question. Yeah, no, there are. I guess in jazz, I mean, I'll take whatever help I can get,
Yeah.
in life. And so I have an album I'm working on that's called Savage Detectives. It's after the
Mhm.
Bolaño book. It's a live record though, so I got to finish that, and then I mean, I'm mainly parenting a lot. That's
Yeah.
what I'm doing right now,
Yeah.
and my wife is working. So and I'm trying to get my book published.
Yeah.
And so I want to get it published, and maybe in some sort of digital format as well.
Yeah.
And then I have another book. I have a few other book ideas. I write. I like writing, and maybe I could make more money doing that than playing jazz gigs.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's not a whole lot of money in either one of those
No.
professions.
No.
But, that's awesome, man. Well, I'll be looking for all of it. Like I'm definitely like I'm trying to it's the album that it was on Apple Music, and it like it has, I think it's you, is it on the cover with like an orange guitar? Um,
Oh yeah, that's my first album. It was
yeah.
before I was trying to get rid of my name. Yeah, that was that the album is called Uncivilized, but it's under my full
Oh
name,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Tom Chitari. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I'm like, as soon as we get off this call, I'm gonna pop it back in and listen
Oh,
to
cheers. That's
it.
got a tune called Fahey on it.
Oh, it
Yeah.
does. Right
Yeah.
on. So I'm excited for the book. I'm excited for what you've got coming out musically. How can people like keep up with you?
My website is uncivilizedtom.com. That's pretty
Okay.
easy to remember with a Z. And then the guitar project is at guitaruncivilized.com.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been lovely conversation.
Oh, yeah, likewise. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Trace.
All right. You're welcome.